Hi, this is Miss Litton, and this is a lunchtime review as we get ready for our final. And some of you are revisiting that we're here from our licorice days of yesterday. And we are now moving on to Unit 6. First of all, I would make sure on Unit 6, structure and function of the blood vessels, heart chambers, and valves. So you want to know things like arteries go away from the heart, veins towards, capillaries are where all exchange takes place. Why are the capillaries so good for exchange? Because they're one cell thick, and the blood moves very what through them? Slowly, which allows for diffusion, and they're only one cell thick, so that's good. You want to know your chambers of the heart. Do you remember them? Remember it like a box? Let me see, am I live? No, I'm not. Un momento. Okay, so when you do the heart, do you remember that we make it like a box? Remember? And this is the right atrium, and this is the tricuspid valve, RAT, right? And this is the right ventricle, left atrium, and left ventricle, right? Okay, so then the blood that comes in here to the right atrium, remember it goes down, 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 and out. And where do we need to go? To the lungs. Good. So we're going to the lungs. And do you remember how we name the vessel that take us to the lungs? Pulmonary. Yep, we always use the word pulmonary. What else do we use? Arteries go away. And then remember, it's like if it was on us. So over here would be the left pulmonary artery, and over here would be the right pulmonary artery. Good. Goes to the lungs, it comes back oxygenated into the left atrium, down through the bicuspid valve, out the left ventricle, and what's that large vessel that goes out? Aorta. Good. So you just might want to review that in case I ask you a question about one of those chambers and where it goes. All right. Coming back here. Oh, valves. There's only one valve I left off. What are the valves right here? Semilunar. Where else do you find valves? Arteries, veins, or capillaries? Veins, right? And that keeps blood going in one direction. Good. All right. Good. Pathways. There was the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit. The pulmonary circuit is going to start from where to where? Right ventricle, right, and end in the left atrium. And the systemic circuit going out to the rest of your body is going to start at the left ventricle. Remember, it has the oxygenated blood in it. Out to your body and come back to the right atrium via the superior and inferior vena cava. Is another name for them, or anterior and posterior, right? Okay, sweet. Components. What is in blood? Plasma is the water. Good. Plasma. Okay, that's the fluid part. Okay, do you remember what is dissolved in the plasma itself? Salt. Yeah, so remember our road trip? Mm-hmm. So we stop, right, and we get gases, salts, nutrients, proteins, hormones, vitamins, nitrogenous waste. That's in the plasma. What are the formed elements inside of the plasma? Formed elements. What's in the blood? What makes up the blood? The cells. One of them carries oxygen for you. Red blood cell. What else?
White blood cells.
Mm-hmm. What's the job of each? Red blood cells carry oxygen. White blood cells fight. And we're going to talk about the immune system and visit that again. And then platelets, blood clotting. Good. All right. I don't think I asked any questions on the disorders of blood. The only one maybe I would ask is, what do you call high blood pressure?
Hypertension.
Mm-hmm. Good. All right. So I think we covered everything there. Let's start talking about the immune system. The first thing is non-specific defenses. These are things that everybody has. Let's start though by saying, how do we keep things out of our bodies? We use what? Hair. Skin, mucous membranes, low pH, wax in the ears, right? Those are all barriers to keep things out of our bodies. But once it gets in our bodies, if something gets across and gets in our body, we have what is the most common, most ubiquitous white blood cell. First on the scene usually. Not B, that's a specific immune response. Starts with an N. Neutrophils. Maybe think about it like neutrophils neutralize. Does that make sense? Okay, because they're first on the scene. What are the big, large eaters that come in and eat a bunch? Good. Macrophages. Good. Those are two examples of non-specific defenses. Specific defenses, let's talk about that. Because you have two categories. Okay, you have B cells and you have T cells. B cells are associated with antibodies. Do you remember that? Okay, and T cells are about cell-to-cell combat. Because there's two issues when you're fighting. You have your viruses. Let's say this is some virus that's in your body, okay? You have the viruses that can be free-floating. Then antibodies will take care of those because they can mark them for destruction. Then, and get them, remember the antibodies, how they're Y-shaped? Do you remember that? Okay, and so they can tag them for destruction. Then the other issue you have is when your own cells have a virus within them. And that's when the T cells come along and then they'll kill that cell because it's harboring that terrorist inside. So two ways to take care of infections, B cells and T cells. Now, we want to remember that B cells, they will come into contact specifically with that virus and with a direct contact. And then they will make two, grow and divide, and they'll make two types of cells. Do you remember what they are? One starts with a P. And one, I go like this. Plasma cells and memory cells, okay? So when a virus comes in contact with a B cell, a virgin B cell, you'll get two cells from that contact. You will get a plasma cell and you'll get a memory cell. Remember, the memory cell is for next time. It's faster. It makes your response faster. But a plasma cell will grow and then he will release all kinds of antibodies, those Y-shaped markers. Those antibodies will mark a pathogen for destruction. It might get engulfed or something like that. Okay? T cells do not come in direct contact with a virus. T cells come in contact with one of your cells with the virus inside of it. Remember, there were the T cell receptors. Remember, we talked about MHC1s and MHC2s. Remember, MHC2, if you present a virus on that, I will help you. MHC1 and you are done. Remember that? And so a T cell comes in contact with one of your own infected cells. Not just the virus directly, but your infected cells. And as a result of that, he will make three types of cells. Do you remember what the three types of cells a T cell can make? Yeah, okay, so natural killer cell is part of your non-specific response, but he makes a cytotoxic T cell. And that cytotoxic T cell that's your assassin. He's all about killing. He kills specifically, whereas the natural killer cells will kill anything that's foreign. Remember that? Okay. What else will he make? Memory cells, and those are for next time for a faster response. And then what's the third one he makes? No. They get infected with HIV really badly. Helper T cells. Okay, so helper T cells augment your immune response. So this is your specific immune response. If I get 5 viruses in my body, how many B cells will I stimulate? 5, because each B cell is specific to that antigen. So if I get 5 viruses, I will have 5 different virgin B cells that will get stimulated unless I have memory, unless I've met it before, that will respond. If I get 5 different viruses infecting 5 different cells in my body, Those 5 different cells with the virus inside of it will stimulate 5 different T cells. Okay? B and T cells are specific to the response, whereas your non-specific, that's like your police force. Those are your neutrophils, your natural killer cells. They have a general response to anything foreign. Okay? Questions on that part? Okay, let's go back and look at this. We said non-specific defenses. We talked about B and T cells and your immune system, how do you induce it, and the side effects. Do you remember we talked about passive and active immunity? Do you remember the difference between that? Tell the person next to you, what's the difference between passive and active? Okay, did they say something like if it's active immunity, they own it, and if it's passive immunity, you borrow it? So for instance, if you're a mother breastfeeding your child, through your breast milk, you have antibodies that you're giving to them. If you go get bit by a snake this weekend, okay, you're borrowing antibodies from a horse. And so they'll get those antibodies by giving the horse stronger and stronger amounts of snake venom, so they'll build antibodies against it. They isolate it from their blood and give you a shot. You don't own that immunity. You're borrowing it because you need it right now. Active immunity, you own it. And there's different ways to get active immunity. You could be exposed. Somebody could sneeze on you, and you could get sick and develop your active immunity, or you could go get a shot, a vaccine. That's why you get vaccinated, is so that you can own your own immunity, but you do it with a substance that's not going to make you actually sick because they weaken it in the vaccine. All right, any other questions on 3, 4, 5? Okay, let's talk about 6. Nervous and endocrine system both help maintain what? Homeostasis. Who's king of it? Nervous system. Mm-hmm. What does the endocrine system use? You know the answers to this. Starts with H. Hormones. Endocrine system is about hormones, okay, and glands. Remember, the endocrine system secretes into your bloodstream because the blood, the capillaries will move through that gland, and they'll put those hormones into the blood. Does that sound familiar? Okay. And we talked, and the nervous system works quicker, right? Very quick. Endocrine system's a little bit slower. We talked about that there are 2 types of hormones, protein and steroid. If you remember, a steroid is a type of what of your 4 important molecules? Starts with an L. Lipid. And so lipids dissolve into lipids. So steroid hormones can move right through the cell membrane because your cell membrane is made out of what? Phospholipids. So a lipid can pass through a lipid, okay? And so steroid hormone goes in, it'll go all the way into the nucleus and affect transcription and translation of DNA and what proteins you make. Whereas a protein hormone, it stands at the door and knocks because it can't get through the cell membrane, and it usually triggers a secondary messenger inside or a cascade of reactions inside. We talked also about negative and positive feedback. What would your car going down the driveway kind of be like? Negative or positive feedback? Sometimes you step on that. Gas. Sometimes you step on that. Brakes. So you're trying to keep it around a set point. How fast can you drive on the freeway? 65. So sometimes you have to step on the gas to get it to 65. Sometimes you step on the brakes to get it back down to 65. That's an example of negative feedback, fluctuating around a set point. Positive feedback is where it's amping up. The response triggers more of a response, and that response triggers even more of a response. We look at that at birth control. Birth. What's the hormone that helps the baby to come out and your milk to come out? Oxytocin. So you get, when the baby's head pushes against the cervix, that triggers the release of more oxytocin, which makes the baby push even harder, right, as the muscles contract, which triggers more oxytocin until you get to some end point, which is like the baby comes out. Okay. All right, so that's positive and negative, and then contrary hormones. Contrary hormones, they have opposite effects like insulin and glucagon. What does insulin do to your blood sugar? Lowers it, and glucagon raises it. Okay, those are contrary hormones. And then we learned several different glands and what they do. So let me ask you about a few and see if you can remember it. If I was going to talk about melatonin, which helps with sleep, what gland would that be? Mm-mm. Starts with a P, though.
Pineal gland?
Pineal gland. Good. Up in your brain. Pineal gland secretes melatonin, and that increases with sleep. Good. If I was going to talk about your metabolism, what would I talk about? Your thyroid gland. What gland sits on top of your thyroid gland? Parathyroid gland. Do you remember your thyroid gland? Not only does it help with metabolism, with thyroid hormone, but it secretes something called calcitonin. Do you remember what calcitonin does?
Lowers blood.
Lowers blood calcium. And the antagonistic hormone to that is from the parathyroid gland. It raises blood calcium levels. So that's an example of antagonistic hormones. What's a gland that secretes thymosin, which helps mature T cells? It's the thymus gland, and it sits on top of your heart when you're younger. What's something that secretes estrogen and progesterone? Ovaries. What secretes testosterone? Testes. What's going on today? Are you with me? Did you pass out? Who controls the pituitary gland? The hypothalamus. Remember how the hypothalamus controls the posterior pituitary and the anterior pituitary? And the posterior pituitary controls directly, and the posterior pituitary stores the hormones that the hypothalamus makes. And if you remember, the posterior pituitary only secretes two hormones. Do you remember what they are? They're kind of out hormones. Oxytocin and ADH, antidiuretic hormone. Okay? The anterior pituitary secretes things like growth hormone. Remember that? Okay, for growing, that comes from the anterior pituitary, and it's controlled by double capillaries. Remember, it puts a releasing hormone in the stalk that gets carried to the anterior pituitary and then triggers the anterior pituitary what hormones to release, and it releases stimulating hormones, releasing before stimulating. So for instance, the hypothalamus will make thyroid releasing hormone, which it puts in the capillary bed in the stalk, and then that makes the anterior pituitary secrete thyroid stimulating hormone, which gets put in the blood and makes the thyroid gland secrete more thyroid hormone. And this is an example of negative feedback. As the thyroid hormone level rises, then it shuts down negative feedback, both the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. We talked about adrenal corticotropic hormones. We talked about gonadotropic releasing hormones. We talked about FSH and LH. Remember that? Those are all coming out of the anterior pituitary. Let's see. We did that. I think that's good. Okay, nervous system. So the divisions and the functions. Okay. First of all, could you name the three types of neurons and how they work? What? Interneurons. Where are those found? Central nervous system. Mm-hmm. What two more? Motor neurons. And motor neurons go from your central nervous system to your targets. What are your two targets? Muscles or glands.
Yeah.
Okay. And sensory neurons do what? Come from your senses to your brain to tell you what's going on. All right. So we have, how you doing over there, AP? Did you know all the answers? Okay, good. So we have our nervous system, okay, and it's broken down into your central nervous system, right, and your peripheral nervous system. We good on that? Your central nervous system is broken down into what two things? Brain and spinal cord, right? Okay, and then your peripheral nervous system is broken down into your somatic and autonomic. Okay, and your autonomic is broken down into your parasympathetic and your sympathetic. Does that at all look familiar? Yeah. Okay, so central nervous system, things like in your brain. Tell me, what's something that controls your heart rate and breathing? Starts with an M, 2 words. Medulla oblongata. How about memory, learning, thinking, thought, whatever? Your cerebrum. What helps you with balance? Cerebellum. Okay, good. So you have some of those. All right. Then your spinal cord. We know it has a lot to do with reflexes. Okay. In your somatic, this is about choice. I'm writing now using my somatic nervous system. My autonomic is stuff that's unconscious, I don't think about, right? Yeah, remember there was sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic is stress. This is fight or flight. And parasympathetic is relaxing, chilling on the couch. Right, remember that part. Okay, let's go back. So we did breakdown, divisions, functions, a neuron. Okay, so let's talk about the neuron. Remember this?
Yes.
Okay. What is this right here? Dendrite. And it takes information towards the nucleus. And then this is the axon. And it can have a myelin sheath on it. Do you remember that? Yeah. And then where 2 neurons meet, that's called the synaptic cleft. Oh, yeah. And along the length of it, it's all electrical. And then here it is chemical. Remember, and passively it diffuses across, and it might excite or it might inhibit the next neuron, right? That neurotransmitter can excite or inhibit. And if we grab this neuron right here, the outside of the neuron is charged positively and the inside is negative. And that's because we have a bunch of sodium ions on the outside that are all positive. We also have potassium ions inside that are positive, but there's more positives outside than inside. And also we have some negatively charged ions in here. Remember that? Yeah. And so who sets up this resting potential where it's positive on the outside and negative on the inside? What process sets up the resting potential? Sodium potassium pump sets up the resting potential. It puts 3 sodiums out for every 2 potassiums inside, right? Okay, so that's the sodium potassium pump that's setting up the resting potential. And remember how it has a negative charge? Remember how we looked at that? Okay, and so remember there was a graph. If this was 0, the resting potential down here minus like 65 or 70 millivolts, and then we talked about that you can see it becomes positive and then it comes back down negative again. Do you remember that? And what makes it become positive? Because sodium is going in the neuron. Yeah. And then the quick fix is what? What happens here? Potassium goes out. Okay? So sodium comes in. That's the action potential. And real quick it fixes potassium back out. Okay? So sodium potassium pump sets it up, then sodium comes in, potassium goes out, and then the sodium potassium pump has to put everybody back in the right spots. Okay, and that would be a neuron. And then I did not, that's resting action potential, and then there aren't any additional objectives. So you might have some things there you might want to review, okay? Just saying, I'm just saying. But have a piece of toast and review. Love you very much. Okay then.